Yeah, I think what I'll do is just be brief on it. As you know, Brian's not only our special teams coordinator, but also our recruiting coordinator. So two very important functions for us. So after I say a few words, I'll let Brian say a few words, and you can ask either one of us questions as we go through this. This year, as you know, was the first year for an early signing date, and that played out very well for us. Right now, I think I'm in favor of an early signing date. We had 20 players that we signed on that date. That happened to be at the Bull site, which was a little unusual for us, but it got coordinated very well. And then we had one player that we signed today to make the class 21. As you go through it and you look at it, there's 12 on defense, 9 on offense. We lost people up front defensively in the line, pretty much across the board. Lost 2 starting linebackers. Lost a corner, so we got hit pretty hard defensively. Usually you need to be at least 2 years ahead of where your losses come. So we think we did a pretty good job the previous year in recruiting of linebackers and also some defensive linemen, although it was a year for us to make sure that we recruited some interior guys from junior colleges to get some possible immediate help up front. So we did do that. We've also we actually have a total of 5 guys that came in early. 2 junior colleges and 3 high school players that are with us right now that'll be able to go through spring ball with us, and also be able to go through DAC's lifting and conditioning program, which will be very important and very huge for those guys and us. 9 different states the players have come from, so that stays with what we've been all about pretty much since we arrived here, I think, in terms of being able to attract players from around the country. Always start with Ohio players and work hard on Ohio players. 7 of those are in this class, so we feel very good about that. But we still were able to get I think Pennsylvania has 4, I think Florida 3. So we're still able to reach out and gather players from around the country. So I think it's a very good class. Obviously, it'll remain to be seen when they get here and as it all unfolds. But my experience tells me that it's going to be an excellent class, which will match up with the last few classes we've had, which means we should be able to see very good football from Ohio down the road. Brian?
Yeah, Coach hit on it earlier. As he said, this was the first year for the early signing period, and that was big for us because a lot of those official visits take place during our home games early in the year, and the attendance is great, atmosphere is good, and to get those kids here on a Saturday in Athens was big.
Yeah, weather's not bad either.
No, it's good. Yeah.
Just so I'm clear, Brian, you'd rather get those visits on a Saturday in September than a 10-degree night on a Tuesday in November? It's easier and it works out better that way?
Yeah. Now it is. The staff does a good job, and it's challenging to have in-season visits because you're prepping for the game, and then after the game you got the dinner, breakfast in the morning, and you got to grade the film. There's a lot that goes into it, but as we know, good players is what it's about.
Either one of you guys wants to answer this, that's fine. What was the lesson you learned going through this first year of the early signing period or the double signing periods? What lessons did you take away from this? Is there anything you'd do differently or change, or adjust, I guess, with 1 year under your belt in this regard?
I think the biggest thing is what we're catching right now is we're working so far ahead of where we had been. But our commitments, they were solid all the way through with this past one. But yeah, moving ahead forward, we're heavy in the 19s, and you always work ahead, but we're more ahead now than what we've been in previous years.
You've got to be. I'll just touch on it. You got to be organized. I think for it to play out well, you've got to view a lot of film earlier than maybe, and make some decisions earlier, because players are coming in, they're taking official visits. Some of them want to know if they have scholarships or not. In fact, we wouldn't invite them in if they didn't. And then you know, also they're trying to settle on a school, and so you've got to be ready to go pretty early on with these guys in terms of who you want, and visiting with them about actually getting here. And I think Brian organized it very well, did a great job, and I think, as Brian mentioned, our coaches carried it out very well.
Now, you said this class is great, is excellent. What makes it so great? What can we expect for the 2018 season?
Did I say great?
You did.
I think good was what you said.
Not good? Yeah. Maybe I said excellent. Right? Yeah. No, I think it will be, because when you watch them on film, you look at where they're at in terms of grades, their character. I think that all plays into having a great class, because obviously, if you're wanting to get the best players you can get, and all of a sudden, you know, character issues pop up, academic issues pop up, and you weren't very thorough in the recruiting process, that recruiting class that you brought in may not be the same recruiting class 2 to 3 years from now. And so I believe this is a good group all the way through. Our coaches did a very thorough job of really checking the guys out. So, and they're talented, they're athletic, and you know, last year we played 5 freshmen. You know, whether or not this class will produce playing 5 freshmen, I don't know, but there are mature players in this class, like there was in the last class, where that might be a possibility.
Were you looking more for like speed, skill, or strength, or was it all across the board what you were looking for?
Yeah, a little bit of it depends upon position, but yeah, I think in every class you have to have a certain amount of speed. If you don't have guys that can make explosive plays on both sides of the ball with their speed, then that class will lack something. So you always look for speed in a class. I think in our case we look for toughness, you know, because you know, my experience tells me over the years that it's easier to win with tough guys than with guys that aren't so tough, and so that's a huge part of what we look for. We know that we can develop players in terms of their strength, and put some weight on, maybe take some weight off. Our program is set up to do that. Dak does that very, very well with our strength and conditioning with our guys here, and so we don't have to have the physically mature guy throughout the class. You know, we can take some guys that are going to be able to put on some strength, put on some size. One of the tougher things to do is develop speed in those guys, you know, so that's where the speed part of it, I think, is important to cover that base in your class.
Brian, you talked earlier about how the early signing period kind of changed everything, but in terms of the schedule, how does it change it? Are you looking more at film earlier than you have in years past?
You talking about our daily?
Yeah.
Our daily schedule? Yeah. Yeah, there's no doubt. No.
Does it make the summer more hectic than it
Well,
is?
summer's always going to be big in camps for us, but even the past 3 weeks on the road, you know, as Coach said, we signed Jeremiah today. Everybody else was done before, so now you're working ahead. So it's sped up big time, but yeah, camps are still going to be big in June for us. Always have been.
Frank, did today seem weird? you've been at this a long time. You know that first Wednesday in February is a big deal. How did this feel differently to you? You know, not having the pressure, not having to worry about 17, 20, 22 guys.
Well, we knew we were only going to sign one more player at this signing period, and we just had him in this past weekend for a visit with his mother and father, and they got along well. We knew the commitment was very, very solid. So, you know, it wasn't a deal where we were waiting to see how that all played out at the end, and did we lose anybody, or how's it working? You know, all of a sudden you're not hearing from somebody. So none of that occurred. So, you know, it wasn't as much drama, you know, but in coming into the office this morning, there was still, I'm not a fan of Starbucks coffee, but there was Starbucks coffee there with 2 big deals of donuts, and which is pretty traditional for us on signing day. You know, so that was still there. That was still part of it. But other than that, the feeling was not really the same.
You guys still stocked up the same way.
Stocked up the same way. Yeah.
Coach, how important was it to get student JUCO transfers on campus early? And then you guys lost a lot of friends. So
Yeah.
how important is it to get those guys on campus?
Really important. We were on a mission to get that done. So that was huge for us. And both those guys are very solid guys, and they're really good players, and they're physically ready to play. You know, and so that's going to be a big plus for us. You know, we have guys that are coming back that are good, that are going to get better, but man, you've got to have depth up front with your line, and those guys are going to be able to supply us with immediate depth.
Coach, why don't you guys continue to get bigger, taller in the secondary? Do you value that as far as, you know, having bigger guys in your secondary rather than, you know, the secondary bowl where it's like 5'11" guys, you know, 6 foot safeties? Now you guys have 6'2" and 6'3" corners.
Yeah, you know, obviously you face a lot of tall, athletic wideouts, and so, you know, you'd like to have your corners have some size to them. Now, you know, when we evaluate players, though, we see guys making plays all the time that aren't at the height. That's the prototype, and so really it comes down to making plays, and will they tackle? How smart are they? Will they bust coverages or not? All that comes into play. If you can find a guy that's, you know, at the corner spot 6 feet, 6'1", you know, then that's great. If the guy happens to be 5'8", 5'9", and is a legitimate player, that's great too. You know, so because a lot of those guys can also be used on special teams, and that's where I think we've done a pretty good job of making sure that many of the players that we recruit are able to be carried on over in the special teams play.
Coach, Tim talked about earlier before the bowl how excited he was about your role and how there's qualities in him that Poppy have on the field. Do you see the same qualities, and what does he bring?
Yeah, he's an explosive player. You know, he will line up as a slot receiver for us, like Poppy does. He's going to get a shot right away, and he's got great hands, but he's got the great quickness that is really what you look for. You know, if you look at guys like the Patriots have, you know, a lot of times they're not the tallest guys, they're not the biggest guys at their slot position, man, but do they make plays? You know, and so, you know, I think he's, you know, he can be similar to Poppy in certainly some ways.
Brian, Nayland Yates just committed to you guys a couple hours ago. You guys always have a local kid or two. Is that something you guys are looking for in each recruiting class?
The walk-ons are a huge part of our program, and there's some that we can talk about now and some that we can't, as far as there's some different steps they have to do. They have to be admitted, pay their housing, so we're going to announce all those guys at once. But yeah, especially the local kids, you know, Brody Rogers, Hunter Edwards, those guys, it's always great to have them.
Do you find a little bit of that self-fulfilling prophecy. Like if one or two of those guys gets in your program and sticks, it opens the door for maybe other guys in that same geographical area who didn't think it was possible before.
Sure. I mean,
seeing increased interest or feedback and things in that regard.
yeah, and we've always said our best recruiters are our team. You know, those guys as far as just position group and area wise. But yeah.
Coach, you guys next to some kids from some pretty big name high schools, Cathedral Prep and Erie, Mountain Prep, Pickerington Central, even down in Florida. Is that something you guys look at? Do you guys go to the schools with particularly in this class, did you guys go to the schools with, good reputations for producing good talent and then expand from there? How did you approach that?
Yeah, our guys, most of our guys have been with us for quite some time. They've got a lot of connections, so we really start off with connections, and but you're obviously wanting to make sure that you're touching base with all the schools that have been successful, and especially those that have been successful year after year that produce athletes year after year. But really, you go wherever they're at, whether it's a big school, small school. You just view a ton of film, and after you've visited with the schools that you normally go to and you've got an association with, then film will take you other places.
I thought it was odd that you guys signed 3 wide receivers, given some of the young talent already in the program. Why the continued need to go back to that position group? I think there was one senior, counting 2 with a walk-on, but not big losses this year, I guess. I'm a little surprised to see 3 wide receivers. Why dip heavily back into that specific position group with this class?
Yeah, well, we have at least 3 wide receivers on the field most of the time, and depending upon the number of tight ends that you have ready to play determines whether or not you'll put 4 wideouts on the field at one time. They're doing a ton of running. And so, the kind of injuries that pop up that can keep a guy out of a game or 2 games, maybe 3 games, a pulled muscle, leg injuries that'll keep a guy out for 2 or 3 games in the wideout position can pop up on you. And so you got to have depth, and it's got to be quality depth, and it's got to be depth that can get on the field and play right away. So in order to do that, you got to have a number of wideouts in your system.
Is it the numbers that you've used to determine depth at position groups? How much of those changed over the course of your career? How much have they changed in the last 8 to 10 years? For instance, maybe 15 years ago, you decided 9 wide receivers was the best number for your roster at a particular time. Just rough estimate, what are some of the big changes you've seen in how you structure a roster by position?
Yeah, we haven't varied too far from what we're normally about number-wise, but depending upon, obviously, the amount of players you lose at the position determines that year how many guys you recruit at that position, and so we pretty much go with that. But in saying that, if you find an exceptional athlete that you think you want in the system, even if you're at your numbers at that position, you'll go ahead and take him. You can't do that at too many positions, but you can at some positions. And so you look at quality also as you throw it in the mix in terms of numbers at the position. But you got to have depth. I mean, especially with the people up front.
Yeah, I wondered if you had like a blueprint, like in an ideal world where no one got hurt ever, my roster would have
21 offensive linemen.
29 offensive
21.
21.
Yeah. If you have 19, you're okay, but if you get down to 17, you're biting your fingernails. And so every position, there is a number attached to it.
Any other questions, guys? Thanks, Coach. All right, guys. Thanks, Coach.
All right, thank you.